BruCast is back, baby.
This BruCast episode is brought to you by the BruCast Store. Explore a store filled with awesome goodies from hoodies to t-shirts to mugs. We've got you covered. Stay in style with BruCast. Embrace the shock, set the trend. Visit now bru-cast.com/store. Link below. Alright, hi everyone, welcome back to another BruCast episode. If it's your first time watching the show, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please rank the show 5 stars, just to ensure that the podcast is recommended to even more people. BruCast is also on Instagram, X, TikTok, where we upload shorts with the highlights of the show. So follow now, BruCast on Instagram, X, and TikTok. Links on the description below. So our guest today is Mathieu Johnsson. So how are you doing, my friend?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks, Bruno, for having me on BruCast. Really excited to have a chat over the next hour and a half. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. So thank you very much for being a part of BruCast. And nice to meet you. So it's the first time that we're talking, right?
Yeah. Very curious to hear more about your story and have just a general conversation on talking about hopefully a bit about my company and what we do with drones.
Of course, we're gonna talk about it all. So what about you present yourself? So you already said you have a company that's about drones. That's very exciting.
Where do I start? So I guess, Matt I'm from France. I've been living in the UK for the last 12 years, where I moved to work on aircraft design and worked at Airbus, which you probably have heard of, pretty big company designing planes, and pretty quickly got frustrated by, large company, not super innovative. And I'm sure you've seen with cars, becoming electric, there's a lot of innovation going into modes of transport at the minute, and planes are kind of lagging behind. So I wanted to work on how can you accelerate, the transition to electric transportation, airborne. And so, I started a company, 8 years ago now, building drones. And I'm actually in Uruguay at the minute because we're doing some flying for a customer here. So hopefully the connection is good enough to maintain a video link throughout. So I guess that's a short intro on me.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. You're a little bit pixelated, but it's good enough.
Okay.
It's good enough.
The European network.
So you're in Uruguay. It's your first time in Uruguay?
Yes. Yeah. I guess I don't know how common it is for holidays to come here. I've been to Brazil before. But yeah, only first time in Uruguay. Are you familiar with the area?
Sorry?
Are you familiar with the area?
Uruguay? No, I never been to Uruguay. I would love to. I've been to Argentina, I think a couple of times. I've been to Chile, Peru, a lot of South American countries, but Uruguay never. Yeah.
How come?
Right now, let's go. All right. So you worked at with planes before, right?
Yeah.
And then because of the whole electric revolution, you're like, okay, I need something new. I need to pursue my own thing. And why is that? Why you're looking to create electric planes? Is that even possible? What was the motivation behind it, basically?
Electric planes are happening now. There are companies that are building this. When I started my company, 8 years ago, there was very little, unless you were in the US. Maybe there were a few leading companies that were doing things in electric aviation, but in the UK or in Europe or really anywhere in the world, there wasn't much at all. So I had to start a company if I wanted to work on that topic. And I guess whether that's feasible, it depends a big so maybe I'll give you a bit of background as to what I was doing specifically in Airbus, because Airbus is like Boeing, like all these big manufacturers of airplane. They typically, like for Airbus, is 150,000 people,
Damn.
and most of the engineers work on very very small components. So it's literally you'd spend your life designing bolts because these bolts need to be designed to very specific standards, and so yeah, it's actually takes a lot of effort, but it's not the most creative type of work you can imagine. But I mean, I guess as a kid, I've been flying planes with my dad since I was very very young. I have pictures of me on top of 4 or 5 pillows in a small aircraft, and on top, and I also come from a family of graphic designers. So it's like a weird combination as a kid where I was like passionate about plane, but also wanted to do something creative. So that's why I ended up studying aerospace engineering, but got very frustrated with designing bolts because that's not super creative. So the job I ended up doing in Airbus took me a long time to get it. I ended up in their kind of like Skunkworks. So I don't know if you know the concept of Skunkworks, but it's kind of like the secretive office where they work on like the plane that might come out like 20 or 30 years from now with all the new technologies in it. It's very hard to get in because it's like 20 people out of 150,000. But that's where I ended up working in Airbus. So yeah, if you want to talk about electric plane and whether that's feasible or stuff like that's like my, that's just very passionate about that. And it's an interesting topic because it will happen. There's lots of innovation happening in the background now that the general public isn't aware of. And a bit like with all the large language model, let's say a year ago before ChatGPT, not many people were actually aware of the progress happening. There's going to be a moment like this in electric aviation, probably in the next 2 to 3 years.
Wow.
But when I say electric aviation, I'm not talking like the next Airbus long range aircraft you will take will be electric. That's the very hard thing to do. I'm talking very small aircraft called basically AirTaxis. I don't know. Have you heard of them? Have you seen anything about AirTaxis recently?
No. Never heard about AirTaxi.
Interesting. So it's well, you could there's actually so check Lilium because it's a German company. LILLIUM. Oh, sorry, U not A. Yeah, but that's the company. So I don't think this is the best example because I don't think this company is doing super great at the minute. But it's basically, imagine a small general aviation aircraft, like the one that you can fly recreationally. You make it electric, and you make it take off and land vertically. So the idea with this is you could get picked up, like in the city center of a city, and get a commute to like a larger airport with this much faster and at the same cost of Uber. Ultimately, like the economics are very are actually very very good long term once the technology has matured. And these planes are flying now. I think the leading company is Joby. So if I were you, I would check that. JOBY.
JOB.
And Y.
Or text Joby. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So for those who are just listening,
these guys are flying.
So for those who are just listening, it basically looks like a huge DJI drone with like a helicopter cockpit, right? That would be an accurate description.
Yes, but with one difference. So DJI does, it's basically helicopters with multiple rotors. That's what a Joby is. It's not. It doesn't have a Joby's. DJI's drones don't have wings. They're just small helicopters. These aircraft are called also eVTOL. So E for electric and VTOL for vertical takeoff and landing. So these are actually planes. But they can take off vertically, because you can imagine if you want a air taxi that can get to people easily, you're not going to build runways everywhere. You need those planes to be able to take off and land vertically. But they can't be helicopters. They need to be planes because helicopters are very inefficient, just the physics of it. So that's why I can see why they look like a DJI, but fundamentally they are planes that can take off and land vertically rather than like helicopters.
Mm-hmm. Why helicopters?
Yeah, so this company,
Sorry, go ahead.
This company Joby, they did flights recently from New York City. There are I don't know how, there are videos. You can say like the Joby flight is quite the one about New York City. And yeah, they've built multiple aircraft. They've delivered some to the military for testing. So these will probably fly commercially in the next, maybe the next 2 years. Obviously, to start with, is going to be very, very specific routes, probably quite expensive. But the fundamental economics are such that probably in 10 years, it might be the same cost as getting on a regular taxi, but just much faster. And the implication for society in general are very, very interesting, because you can imagine that a large part of how the real estate is driven today is based around how close you are from amenities, right? Your house is going to be more expensive because it's in a nice neighborhood, because it's easy to access that neighborhood. But if you suddenly make transport much easier, much faster, why would you if this exists, the Joby, if this exists, why would you not live in the countryside and you can get a 5-minute commute to the city center of where you want to work, or if you want to meet your friends? Kind of completely changes the paradigm of how cities work. So yeah, I think it's just, most people don't know that this is happening in the background, but as you can see, it's very real. It's not early prototypes, and I think that it'll be out commercially probably in the next 2 years or so.
Wow, that's amazing. And so basically, in the next 2 years, we're gonna have air taxis like this. That it's basically like Ubers. They won't be as cheap as Uber in the beginning, maybe in 10 years from now, but this will already be available in the next 2 years.
Yeah. The availability is going to be very specific to the routes where it really makes sense to deploy these air taxis. And it won't be fully basically long term. These are going to be fully automated. You won't have a pilot on board. They're going to be flying very high volume of routes continuously. But you can imagine when they're going to start, you're going to actually have a pilot on board. You're going to have a low frequency. So it's going to be more expensive. And so the consensus on where these are going to be deployed originally is most likely to do what they had in that video you were showing just earlier. It's to do a flight between, say, New York City, where you have an helipad already, between New York City and JFK. So, the main international airport, and replace helicopters to start with. So it's probably going to start quite expensive, but as the increased volume of production and becomes, just higher volume of flights in general, price going to go down really quickly. And it's interesting you were mentioning Uber, because Uber used to have a division called Uber Elevate. That was actually designing these aircraft, and Uber wanted, maybe 5 years ago, they started thinking about the infrastructure and how it would impact their business once you have those aircraft. They eventually pulled out because it was too early that they did this, but they clearly see this as something that would impact their business, because those companies like Joby, they won't sell the plane, they will sell the flight, the ticket, which might ultimately impact Uber.
Yeah, they should be worried. So where they're developing this technology, obviously in the US, you mentioned Germany as well.
Yeah, so tons and tons of companies are building this at the minute, but most of them are not credible. There are two that are really credible. One is Joby. The other one is Archer, ARCHER, also based in the US. Archer Aviation. So these are the two leading ones. You have a few in China. You have in Europe, the two leading one is Vertical Aerospace in the UK. Actually, they're based in Bristol, which is where I am based when I'm not in Uruguay. And the other one mentioned in Germany, it's Lilium. Archer and Joby are by far the two leading companies in that space.
Damn, that's so interesting. I want to be in the future. So, when I was a kid, I imagined the future of like flying cars everywhere. I mean, that's the next best thing, basically, right?
Yeah, I mean that's what it is. Like these are flying cars, really. Um, yeah, and so I can't remember the exact speed, but it's like ultimately you're going to be able to travel longer distances much faster than you would if you were just having a car. So it's yeah, I think it's gonna it might have large societal impacts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
So it's gonna. So the way I understand it's gonna be a service like Uber. It's not something that you're gonna own. It's not like those companies will just sell those vehicles to whoever wanna buy them, right?
yeah, absolutely. There are a few companies that are building flying cars that are like for the general public to purchase. I can't remember the name now. Yeah, I can't remember the name, but there are a few doing this, but that's going to be a very niche market. The thing that is going to be impactful is those company we've just talked about that sell the service, because nobody, you don't need to own an airplane. I mean that's and the way airplanes end up being cheap to use, the fact that international travel or like is relatively affordable these days, um, despite the planes being very expensive. I mean, I don't know if have you flown on an A380? It's like the big double decker from Airbus, or
Mm,
you don't know.
um,
It's like the big double decker.
A380.
It's like the biggest. Yeah,
No.
it's very popular. Yeah, Emirates has most of their planes are A380. So if you had flown a flight, through Dubai, but yeah, this airplane costs 500 million. So and even the smaller one, they're like in the tens or hundreds of millions. So planes are very expensive. The reason they're so cheap to use is because you get very high utilization. So I don't know if you've noticed, but when you land in a plane, you disembark, and then as you're disembarking, they're already cleaning up, they're refueling, and they're getting all the next batch of passengers ready to get in. So the way it's so cheap, those flights, is because you buy a plane and then you use it almost 24/7 for like 40 years, and you depreciate it. So getting back to the idea of the air taxi, for it to be cheap, it needs to be operated by someone, and then you just pay for a very small slice of the use of it, for when you need to do it in one trip. It won't be someone owning you won't need to own your own vehicle, unless maybe you're an ultra wealthy individual and you want one always at your disposal, and then it's more like a helicopter. But for them, I guess it won't change that much. It's going to be more impactful for people who don't have helicopters and now suddenly are going to have almost the same benefit as having a helicopter, but for a fraction of the cost.
Wow. Did you see? I saw recently. I don't know which company. I think it was a Chinese company. They were experimenting those extremely small, tidy spaces for the passengers, where they would not even sit. They'll like kind of be standing up, and they said that they would do that so they could fit even more passengers into the plane. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Um, I've seen some things. I don't know if it's the one you're mentioning. Um, yeah, I mean, so one of the things that is difficult with planes for safety is there are rules that you need. So I'm gonna say a number, but it might be wrong. I think you need to evacuate all the passengers within 90 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
I think. Again, don't quote. Hopefully, I don't get quoted on the number. And the issue is if you start stacking more and more people inside the same volume of fuselage, is it gets harder to satisfy that requirement. So there's going to be a limit at some point on how many, like outside of is it comfortable or not to be standing. There's going to be an issue at some point. You can't satisfy that. I think one of the things that I find more interesting is, I don't know if you saw, there's one company, so it's I think Air New Zealand, and they have they've set up an item you can purchase when you do a flight on their aircraft, which is you can buy the full row, and the seats have something that reclines below the seat itself, which means it becomes kind of a couch. And that's not like first class or anything. That's just like an economy. And it means like, you could buy 3 seats for like, someone, you was your kid or maybe like a couple. And now you have like a little kind of like couch and it's apparently really popular. I haven't been on this, but to me that looks more interesting than standing up for a flight.
For sure. So which company is doing this? Do you know?
It's Air New Zealand.
Air New
the
Zealand,
manufacturer.
great.
Yeah.
I love Air.
I'm not sure who manufactures the seats, because it's not going to be the airline, but the company that uses them is Air New Zealand.
Damn, I need to go to New Zealand. So earlier you mentioned Skunkworks. So I heard this term before, referring to Lockheed Skunkworks.
Yeah, Lockheed Martin. Yeah.
Lockheed Martin. So that's where you worked at?
No, it's I used to work at Airbus, but the term Skunkworks has become synonymous with a type of kind of like a department within an organization, and it's been I'm pretty sure even Google refers to like Skunkworks occasionally in terms like when you want to have a very specific behavior, like high innovation within a team, within a company. People are trying to emulate what that team at Lockheed used to do, and that team within Lockheed was called the Skunkworks. So, for example, the team in which I was in Airbus, it was Future Projects, but nobody has heard. Okay, unless you're very knowledgeable about the industry, you don't know about Future Projects. But some people, it's way more common to know about Skunkworks, which is like high innovation, kind of like a sub entity in a company. And I mean, if you have people that are passionate about planes on your show, it's they would know about lots of planes that were designed by that team called Skunkworks. I don't know, maybe you will know some of them, but it's like a really famous one is the Blackbird, the RSR-71. That's like a reconnaissance aircraft that used to fly like Mach 3. It's not in service anymore. There's the U-2. Like there's tons and tons of planes that came out of Lockheed and were originally designed in that Skunkworks team. So but mostly now, if you use Skunkworks to talk about that high agility, small, very empowered team that can very quickly build new hardware stuff.
Got it. So Skunkworks is like just the future project, secret, not necessarily tied to Lockheed Martin. Okay, got it.
The name Skunkworks specifically, if you were to search that online, you will find like it is very specifically to Lockheed Martin. It might even be trademarked, but it's just as a concept. That's like you could say we're doing like, this is kind of like Skunkworks, but so I don't think you would be able to just call your own department Skunkworks. Yeah.
Got it. So this Blackbird plane isn't the one that Tom Cruise flies at the beginning of Maverick, Top Gun Maverick.
The one they fly in the movie. I think it's meant to be an homage, probably to the Blackbird. The one they fly in the movie I think it was designed in partnership with Skunkworks, but it's a imaginary plane. So I can't remember how the
Dark
number.
Star.
Dark Star. This plane doesn't exist, but I'm pretty sure it was designed with the Skunkworks team for it to look like an actually reasonable aircraft. But yeah, it does kind of look similar to the SR-71. Though in the movie, as far as I remember, they go to what, like Mach 9, was it? I can't remember the speed they reach in that scene at the beginning. The Blackbird was Mach 3 point something. So quite a bit slower than the Dark Star.
I heard somewhere that Tom Cruise was like single-handed saved the Air Force because so many people enlisted at the Air Force just because of Top Gun. I heard something like that. I don't know if you confirmed this.
I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, it's I think it's the original or that movie, they're both great, and they make it look very, very exciting to be in the Air Force. So I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people enlisted based on these movies. Yeah. I mean, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a fighter pilot.
Really?
I have terrible eyesight. Yeah. Just I need to. I wear glasses. I mean, I have contact lenses, but like, I don't know how it is today. But when I was younger, you couldn't become a pilot if you had poor eyesight naturally. So that's why I turned as well to like designing planes instead. Was the next best thing.
Damn. So they rejected you, or you didn't even apply just because of the contact lenses. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't even apply.
Okay.
You can be a pilot in the military or in like civil aviation. You know, like if you can fly airliners with glasses. It's just to be basically a fighter pilot where you take all these Gs, you know, like very aggressive maneuvers. You can't be wearing contact lenses because they'll probably come off. So I don't know if maybe this has changed now. I don't know if you have LASIK, for example, if you could be a pilot. I don't know, but. Back then, at least, like if you had poor eyesight, there was no way, no point even considering it. You were going to get disqualified just on that.
Yeah, same for astronauts, right? I remember when I was a kid, I not even a kid, like a teenager, was researching what it takes to be an astronaut. So you need to be a certain height, certain stature, also not have any eyesight problems. But at least back then, I was like, okay, I'm small, I wear glasses, like it's done. I've never been an astronaut, so.
Yeah, I guess it's the same. Actually, I think for a fighter pilot, being small is almost a benefit, and it might be a limit to how tall you can be because it's easier to fit someone small in a cockpit than it is someone big. But there are definitely as well requirements for like your just like physical performance, I guess. But the thing with like how strong you are, you can train for that. If you have bad eyesight, there's not much you can do. So yeah.
Yeah. Matt, I have a question. So, in preparation for this podcast, I was looking into your profile and background, and I saw like you have this engineering studies background, right? But also you said that you design planes, and my question would be, what's the difference between engineering and design?
Well, so first, like designing planes is like 100% engineering. There's no, so like when you design early stage design of a car, you're gonna have people that will be doing a clay model of a car, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's purely you're looking at the aesthetic. Maybe there's some aerodynamics. Like Tesla look heavily at aerodynamics for their cars, and I'm sure like most manufacturers do. But a big aspect is how good does it look, because that's like how you're gonna make a large part of how you sell cars, right? For planes, it's like you barely look at the aesthetics. It's all driven by like the aerodynamics, the strengths of the different components and everything. Just like it's all about the engineering. So aircraft design, you could say actually aircraft engineering. Like I guess what's implied with aircraft design, it's more that you're looking at the overall aircraft rather than looking at one specific discipline. So you can imagine that when you build a plane, when you design a plane, there you have to consider the aerodynamics, you have to consider the weight of the plane, you have to consider the engine performance, you have to consider how does it get handled on the ground, constraint about like is it going to fit in the gates. It's a very heavily multidisciplinary problem, which means that when you start designing a new plane, you need people that can look at all these things at the same time, and that's quite rare. Like most people tend to specialize just on aerodynamics or just on weights prediction for components. And so aircraft design in general, that's kind of like that's first stage where you look at everything, and so you can make decision about the overall architecture of the plane rather than like looking at some subcomponent details. And that's what like Skunkworks or future projects, that's what those people do, is that they get like maybe 80% accuracy, on like predicting the aerodynamics. I mean, I'm exaggerating. It's probably much better than that, but like, you do a very relatively simplistic prediction, but you do that across all disciplines so you can make the good decision overall. And then it goes into a department that will do the details on like every single discipline. Yeah. So not really aesthetics, I guess, on planes. You don't have like actual design. But that's a shame. I mean, I mentioned earlier on like my parents were both graphic designers and I was passionate about planes. So this thing I wanted to do was I thought someone was getting paid to sketch aircraft to do the aesthetics, and just unfortunately that job doesn't exist. Not in the industry, at least. Like could probably do that for movies and things, but
So there's no one actually worrying about how airplanes look, their aesthetics. It's all about function then when you're designing an airplane.
I mean, I think you you might have someone hired somewhere to do something, but most of the leverage they will, most of the wiggle room they will have for the aesthetics of the plane is going to be the paint job. I mean, you will have, like, I think if you were to ask people that like really like planes and can tell you the difference between, you know, like, I don't know if you have friends like this when you go to an airport and they can tell you, oh, this is a Boeing 737, this is a 777, or those people can probably appreciate the aesthetics and the small differences between planes. And so inherently, the engineers that design those planes create an aesthetic, but it's not like you don't have someone who is there and saying, okay, we need to make those changes to make it look this way. When I'm saying this, by the way, this is all about the large airplanes. Like, I'm not talking about smaller aircraft. Like the AirTaxis, there might be people that look a bit at the aesthetics because that might be an important factor. Or maybe in business jets as well. It's probably something people look at because they are happy to trade off some performance to have something that looks cool. But when you're talking about the large airplanes that you and I get in for like long haul flight, it's all about the performance and not the aesthetics. Maybe the aesthetics is for the, you know, you keep that for the cabin and for the paint job, but not for the shape of the plane.
Got it. I saw in the news recently something about John Barnett. He was a Boeing whistleblower, and he used to work repairing planes, as far as I understand. And he became a whistleblower because he started saying that, well, Boeing is not actually repairing the planes as they should, and turns out he was found dead. So have you heard about this whole story? Like, what's going on that's all I know.
I think I might have seen that in the news, like in the past few days. I don't know much, to be fair. I mean, yeah, I haven't worked at Boeing, so I don't know what the culture is like inside, outside of like knowing from, you know, you looking at the like publicly available data. I mean, the general, again, I'm not very educated on the topic, but the general consensus I have is that I understand is Boeing these days is actually a mix of lots of companies. Because there were just lots of acquisition over time. A lot of the smaller aerospace companies in the past were acquired by Boeing. And most notably, I can't remember, like maybe a few decades ago, Boeing acquired McDonnell Douglas, which was, and at that point, the McDonnell Douglas was a pretty big aerospace company. They were making their own like large airplanes. And that company had a very financially driven culture, like the way it operated. While still Boeing was a very engineering driven culture. And when they merged, the top leadership came from the acquired company from McDonnell Douglas, and over time that meant that Boeing culture shifted from an engineering driven culture to a more like financially driven. That meant a lot of, again, like that's a lot of the problem that are happening today comes from that, from, you know, trying to cut corners, trying to be not looking really at the engineering side of things, but looking at you know, at other spreadsheets and being like, okay, this costs money and doesn't bring us anything, let's just remove that. And then from what I understand, that's like one of the underlying problems that created the culture that is problematic at Boeing today. How does that tie to the guy you were mentioning that was found dead? I don't know, but but yeah, I mean, these are, if you look at large aircraft, there are only really two big companies. There's like Airbus and Boeing, and these companies can't supply enough for the market. So right now, if you were for some airplane, if you wanted to buy an A320, which is the small aircraft Airbus, I can't remember. I think it might be like you order it today and you get it in 10 years or something. I might be exaggerating, but it's like there is way more demand than supply. So like we can't afford to lose like Boeing. Like there's only two really companies doing this worldwide. So it's no matter how many, like they have to sort out their problems, and we all have an incentive. It's not like, oh, you know, like competition, and if they're bad, you know, ultimately they will filter it out. Like it's such a big company that's has such an important impact in the end. Like, you know, what do we do with air travel? And if they go, you just have Airbus. Like they can't. There's no way they can supply the market. So it's a interesting topic.
I remember some years ago, Elon Musk he promised that he would be using the spaceships to low orbit travel, so you could go from one point in the Earth to the other one in like 30 minutes, something like that. As like impressive. How possible is this? How real is this promise?
So I think the caveat to that is that as far as I remember, he said that would be at the same cost as a first class ticket for that distance. Which, I mean, I don't know what percentage of flights of seats sold every year are first class. I'm guessing it's pretty small. And I don't know if when Musk was talking about this, was he saying, once the Starship is fully operational and fully optimized in 20 years, then we get to as cheap as a first class ticket, or was he saying, in 2 or 3 years for the first time we're going to try this, it will be that cost, and ultimately long term it might be as economical as an economy ticket. I don't know, but if it's just replacing first class, I can see that being super powerful for people who have that money and want to do London to Auckland in 30 minutes instead of 24 hours. Like that's, I mean, there's definitely a market for that. But I don't know if that's going to replace like air travel for most people. I don't know the economics. Like it would be, I'd actually be curious to look at that. But yeah.
Yeah, probably not, because most people, they don't fly first class, right? So
no, exactly. But would when Musk was saying that it would come down to that price, did he mean it's going to come down to that price when we first try it, or did he mean like when we have tens of thousands of Starship taking off the Earth every day? I don't know if it gets to that, but like when we have that, it will still be the same price as a first class ticket, because eventually these things, when the price comes down. So yeah,
yeah, I heard there.
So that would be really cool.
Yeah, I hope so. I want to live in the future, man. Starship will try to fly again very soon. I heard. Sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah. Is it like in 2 days or something? I'm really like I can't wait to watch this. Like, it's just so exciting every time.
The next launch will attempt the first step towards refueling in space. Elon Musk lost his claim as having the most powerful space-worthy rocket when NASA blasted its mega rocket to the moon in 2022, but the SpaceX founder could win back the title with his company's next big project, Starship. Okay, so when he will be launched in space?
March 14th. Yeah. Tomorrow? Yeah.
Oh.
Like that Twitter, SpaceX. Yeah, I think it's pretty soon.
The third flight test of Starship could launch as soon as March 14, pending regulatory approval. And they always might cancel because of rain and stuff like that. So, Matt, would you go to Mars if you had the chance?
Well, the problem is when you have people around you, so you're not taking that decision just for yourself, right? You have family, like friends and partners, and I don't know if all of them would go to Mars. So I guess that's like the constraint. But I mean, it does seem inevitable that in our lifetime there will be like a colony on Mars. So I mean, why not? Yeah, but it sounds to me like, if the first generation of people going there is in, I don't know, 5 years from now, you'd probably want like young people that don't have all these ties and are like I'd be curious to know, like in history when you had colonization, what was the demographic? Because I would picture it would be young people that are going for a new life rather than like, I mean, at that point I might be like 40, so I would probably be not the ideal demographic.
Let's say,
but it sounds exciting.
Let's say you can come back. It's just like a 1 month trip. But there's still the risk, right? You're going to Mars, so anything can happen.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. That's a good question. Would you go?
In a heartbeat, yeah. But if I could come back, because as you said, like I have loved ones here on Earth, so
I'd be like, what would I bring? I guess that would be, because as you say, if you go very early, it won't be like like a holiday where because maybe maybe 20 years from now you do that as a holiday and then that sounds really cool. But if you go in the first few flights where it's more of a you're a pioneer taking risks, what would I bring? Yeah. So I'm not. I guess I'm not. I'm not sure. Definitely as a holiday, I would do that. For sure.
Yeah, me too, for sure. So Matt, so let's talk a little bit more about your company. So you work at Airbus, right?
No, that's what I used to work at Airbus.
You used
I
to work
left
at Airbus, yes.
Yeah, I left Airbus. Yeah, maybe 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I started my company Marble. So we basically do. So this is like an older version of our aircraft. This footage from. So for you listeners, we're looking at the website of the company right now, Marble. So it's those air taxis we were looking at earlier. I was saying these air taxis were electric VTOL, so they're planes that can take off and land vertically. And so this is what we do as well. It's just much smaller. So these aircraft are 10 kilos, fly 160 kilometers an hour, take off and land vertically, and we use them to monitor the sea in a way that is much cheaper than using the manned aircraft. And there's lots of there are lots of reasons why we used to not really look at the sea as like a society in general, and there's a big drive now to start doing this. So it's kind of like we're making technology happen that is kind of like heavily needed at the minute. So it's like, for example, I mentioned we're in Uruguay at the minute, and Uruguay has lots of resources at sea, whether that's the fish stocks they have. They have apparently like a very large number of sharks, even though you wouldn't think of like Uruguay having lots of sharks. So they have they also have marine mammals. I think they have I guess oil. I think they have potential like for some oil fields. But anyway, the issues they have, for example, is you have foreign vessels that come in their waters to collect the fish that they're not using. So it's kind of like, imagine as a country you have that resource that you own, really, that's like your capital almost, of fish stock, and you should manage that in a way that is sustainable. So every year you can, even economically, maximize the impact of that asset you have of those fishes. Is like you take the max every year that is sustainable, so that next year you can still keep doing the max, and so over the next 50 years or whatever, you get the best benefit. And you can only do that if you actually know, if you monitor that asset. If you're a company, for example, and you were trying to optimize, I don't know, your stock of whatever, you would have trackers every day that would tell you exactly the status of everything. And to have the same at the scale of the sea to monitor, to know how well your fish is doing, and are people stealing your fish, you need a lot of data to monitor the whole sea, and that's really difficult to do. So their issue, for example, is you might have Chinese or Taiwanese vessels coming in the water and fishing, and they don't know what it's happening, or they know because they can occasionally see them, or satellite data tells them 3 months ago there were people fishing in your seas, but you can't really see it in real time and then respond to it with your vessels and go intercept them. So whether it's those countries or even in Europe, monitoring, same, you have maritime protected areas, but really they're protected only in name, because you don't actually monitor them. So you're claiming they're protected, but it's there's no policing whatsoever. So and the best way to monitor this area at a low cost is to use just the same as those air taxis, but much smaller, because they have the same cost benefits, small flying robots that you can deploy hundreds of them, and then you get all those imageries. You do computer vision on it to detect vessels. There's lots of interesting software elements you can do once you have that data. And that's so what we do is we design and build the planes, the sensors, the software, and then actually exactly like air taxis, we don't actually sell the system, we sell the service. So if say your country or you're a business that needs to know how a specific area of sea is doing, you buy from us dollar per square kilometer, a bit like from a satellite company. If you go on a website and you buy data from a satellite provider, we operate a bit the same way.
How many drones do you currently have?
So I mean, the stage at which we're at is if you imagine like the development of this technology is still like very young. If you imagine a bit like for satellites, 30 or 40 years from now, you had very few number of satellites, and those satellites were being deployed by like single companies or government entities that were going to use the satellite just for themselves. So like the NSA or something, or like some military. You want satellite data, so you buy your own satellite, you put it in space, and then you have exclusive access to that data and you don't share it with anyone. And that's very expensive. Whilst nowadays you have tons and tons of satellites in space, they're being sent by companies that don't use the data themselves. They just collect the data and then they sell it to like hundreds of thousands of people, and it's much cheaper. If you look at drones today, we're very much at the same stage as like 30 or 40 years ago for satellites, where you would, if you want data from a drone, you're going to buy your own drone, or you're going to contract someone to fly a drone for you, but they will just fly it for you. Whilst long term, drones are going to be the same as like the way satellites are today. So you will have people flying drones 24/7. You will have like millions of them across the world. The data will all be processed by that company. And on a website, if you want drone data, you'll just go and, I want data tomorrow in that area, and you just pay for that dollar per square kilometer. And getting back to your point about how many drones do we have today, that vision I've just described, we are still, as the rest of the industry, at that stage where you deploy for a single user. So for us right now, I mentioned we're in Uruguay, we're doing flights with the Air Force here. And so we don't have thousands of drones. We have, in total, since the beginning of the company, we've probably built like 40 or 50 drones. And right now, operationally, we have like 4 or 5 aircraft. And that's typically what we need. We're probably going to triple that by the end of the year. So that's the number of planes we're flying at the minute.
Mm-hmm. So are they actually piloted by a human? They're not autonomous, right?
So you wouldn't. There's a lot of discussion in the industry about like exactly what term you should be using when you talk about like something that doesn't need supervision. So you would say in general they're automated, not really autonomous, which I guess the difference is like automated is you have set a preset course for the drone and it will follow it without human input. It's not autonomous in the sense of, it takes off and then it decides by itself where it goes. Not that it's not technically possible, because for us, for example, you could say, once you detect a boat, loiter around that boat and give us more information about that boat, for example. That's not difficult to do, but that's not typically how drones operate today. So today the drone is automated. So you say, take off now, the drone hovers, then it accelerates forward to transition to fly like a plane, and then it follows a set waypoint. Typically you would do, a pattern to collect data on like a specific area, and then the drone comes back, does the landing, and then that's all automated. That is from the answer to your question from a technology standpoint. From a regulatory standpoint, however, a bit like with, I guess, autonomous cars, even though it's like changing at the minute, for a while you had, well, I guess still like in a Tesla, for example, or like you have autonomy in the vehicle, but you still need a driver that is there to supervise. For drones, it's the same. The drone itself can fly itself completely fine, but the regulation says you need a pilot in command that can seize a drone and can, take over control at all time. So today you still have a pilot on the ground that is in charge of the drone, but the drone can fly itself.
When you say today, so this implies that in the future the goal is to make them completely fly by themselves.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like ultimately, what it will be, I think that's like inevitable. You will have an infrastructure on the ground of kind of like robotic hangars. So imagine like I don't know, a 20-foot container, or something that has the size of a 20-foot container that has 3 or 4 like hatches within which you have a bit like Thunderbird kind of thing. You have they open up and then the drone takes off and then it comes back, swaps its battery or recharges and then go again. And nobody would be involved in those operations outside of, every 6 months you will have someone coming to do maintenance. So inevitable 100%, it's going to be like this in the future. but there are lots of technical and regulatory things that need to happen for this to be to be effective.
Mm-hmm. So do your drones have a name, or you just call them drones?
Well, I guess we should probably find names at some point, but we just have like the reason I say this is like, let's say you want to buy again like satellite imagery. Most people don't know the name of the different satellites. Like you have Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2, like whatever. Like you don't care too much if you're the end user of the data. The people who care about the names are the kind of like nerds that like the technology. And like, I mean, I really care, and I know these names, but for our customers, I don't think it matters too much. So we should probably figure out a name. But the naming convention we use is literally just numbers. So it's like Marble, so MRB, and then we have like 4 or 5. So they're right now using MRB 5. So it's like the 5th generation. And you won't actually, it's not public yet, so there's no actual footage of that drone. So we're gonna, so all of these images are actually MRB4. We've named it Mars on our website, but we haven't actually been using that name internally. So because again, for customers, it doesn't actually matter. They just care about the data. Yeah.
Wow. So all the software linked to the drone is also developed by you and the Marble team. Mm-hmm. It's all custom made just for your drones.
Yes. Okay. I guess there's lots of different layers. If you in that, even just in the software, but if you the whole drone industry is like very mature still, very very young, and you can imagine, let's say if you talk about like an airline or like an Airbus, to make one of these aircraft happen, I don't actually know the number of components, but there's like probably hundreds of thousands of companies. You have you have Airbus that brings everything together, but you have the manufacturer of the engines, you have the manufacturer of the avionics, of the seats, like there's tons and tons of suppliers. And if we roll back to the beginning of the industry, probably all these suppliers didn't exist because the industry wasn't there. So there wasn't a point for having someone who could just build seats, for example. So I'm sure, like, I don't actually know, but I'm sure like the first planes, the seats were just built by the manufacturer of the aircraft because there were no supplier, and then the supplier eventually occurs in the future. If you look at drones today, it's kind of the same in the sense of like lots of pieces of that future puzzle. If we imagine drones 4 years from now and you have all these layers of suppliers, today they don't exist. So if you are someone who wants to not do a quick demo, but actually deliver a service to a customer, you need to build those missing gaps where nothing exists. I mean, to be clear, plenty of things exist. So for example, motors, we buy them off the shelf. We don't build our own motors. The autopilot, we actually don't build it. We also buy it off the shelf. But when it comes to the software, for example, we need to build that ourselves because there are no partners that can just provide exactly what we need. And so, yeah, so for the actual pieces of software we develop, and that's for us, so maybe other companies in the drone industry, you typically have a software to control the drone. So that's kind of like the pilot software, say. So that's something that tells you, is the drone healthy? Is anything overheating? Where is the drone? The speed, like throw warnings. And that most people don't need to know about that software. But there is a lot of interesting things you can do with that software. So it could be, you can use some machine learning to actually start detecting when there might be failures about to occur. So, for example, so there is a lot of interesting things to do on that element. The other element is the way you display the data to the customer. And that is actually interesting because the traditional way drones operate is that you go somewhere with the drone, you fly it, and then you pick up the SD card and then you look at the data afterwards. Mm-hmm. And even in like some military settings, that's still how they do it. But that's not actually what you want. Ultimately, what you want is the data from the drones goes to a server somewhere in real time, and then you can see it as a customer, you can see it on your laptop. You don't need to go where the drone is flown. So that's these are like kind of like the two types of software we build. One is the piloting one to monitor the health and everything, make sure it's safe and optimize the operation of the drone. And the other one is how do you, in real time, collect the data from the drone, upload it to a server somewhere, and then display it in a way that makes sense to the customer. So, filtered completely from the drone side.
It's amazing. So the customer has all the data for himself.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's super cool. So when it comes to the maritime monitoring drone landscape, are you guys the only company, or you have like competition?
There's definitely competition, but there isn't as much as you would think. Because I guess it's not like the maritime monitoring is not the most eye-catching type of activity you can do with drones. Typically, when people think about drones, it's going to be like, oh, let's do logistics, for example. I mean, I don't know what, like, or flying DJI type of things, but so there's no, it's not trendy, and so you don't have tons of people just suddenly deciding they want to build a company in the space because they think it's interesting. So there aren't that many, and the companies that exist are typically like old defense companies. So like Boeing, for example, is a big player in that space. You have a few others. Like there's a Portuguese company called TechEver that is pretty big. But in general, all of these companies, they are going after one market in the marine monitoring. It's defense. And the reason for it is because defense is going to pay way more per square kilometer for your data. And so if you're in an immature industry and you can choose who to sell to, you're going to sell to the person who's going to pay the most. And that does mean most companies are developing very expensive solutions for that very narrow niche of defense because there's so much money in it at an early stage. Again, same as satellite, all the first few satellites were all defense satellites. Ultimately, the market nowadays is not really, like, it's not the biggest section, the defense. It's all the commercial aspect, but early defense tend to be a big customer that helps technology mature. So there are competitors, but they tend to be very expensive, focusing on defense, whilst what we do is we focus on how can you make the data much cheaper so you can sell it to all the people that need it who are not defense. So that's people who want to protect their waters for like illegal fishing again. That could be people who want to survey areas at sea for seaweed monitoring, like growing seaweed. Could be border control for for countries like the Caribbean, for example, where they don't have big budget for their the security. So short answer is there is competition, but it tends to be they tend to focus on a different segment to what we do, which is they focus on defense, and we focus on everyone but defense.
Got it. Damn, that's so interesting. So are you familiar with this documentary from Netflix? I think it came out 2 or 3 years ago, called Seaspiracy.
Yes.
Yes. So I watched it when it came out, and I was mind blown. I had no idea that, like, apparently that's what they claim, that there's overfishing basically everywhere, and in the next 30 years we won't have fish anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's like you can imagine like have you been out at sea, like sailing or like being on a large vessel?
Like 3 times my whole life. I went in vacations in one of those cruises, and then I went like 2 times I did that, and then once I went sail boating, but it was like 3 hours, and then I came back. But that's it.
So I mean, you probably on those boats. I mean, maybe not on a cruise vessel. There's lots of other people, but if you spend time at sea, you realize that pretty quickly you're like all by yourself, and there is zero oversight to what you're doing. And you can imagine, based on that human nature is like you're just going to do whatever you want because there is nothing, like nobody can even see what you do. So it's not even like you might be arrested if you do something illegal. It's just that there is no accountability. So nobody will judge you because you're like fishing somewhere that is forbidden, or you're like you're doing bycatch of like dolphins or whatever. So that's like the big issue today is like if you're a fisherman somewhere, for example, in the UK, there's no accountability because nobody is checking what everyone else is doing. And that means everyone has an incentive to not behave properly, because if the other fishermen are not following the rules of where they should fish or what type of fishing they should do, if you're a fisherman that want to follow the rules, but everyone else doesn't, then you're never going to be in business. And so it's why like you need tools that can collect the data so that you can do that monitoring, and then everyone knows that everyone else is in check as well, and then everyone start following those rules. I mean, what you talked about with Seaspiracy, it is definitely something where there's been a big shift in the mindset of like global leaders. There was a big treaty announced by the UN a few years ago. I forgot the name, but it basically, I think it's the Ocean Sea Treaty or something. High Seas Treaty, I think. UN High Seas Treaty. And it basically says by 2030 they want 30% of the global waters to be protected areas. Yeah, objective to protect at least 30% of the planet by 2030. And so there is a realization that we need to do much better with how we manage the ocean. But the issue becomes again like, sure, it's great to declare things as like protected, but if you don't have the means to know what's happening in those protected areas, then it's kind of like pointless. That's actually an interesting reason. In Uruguay, they have, I think it's like less than 1% of their waters that are protected. And the reason for it is they've said we're not going to protect waters if we know we can't actually mean it. And yeah, that's actually a big reason why we're building what we're building. Is like if you want to protect anything, you need to be able to check how it's doing, check that people are complying with the rules you're putting in place. Otherwise, it's pointless.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. So in Brazil, you're not supposed to jaywalk when the sign is red, right? You're not supposed to cross the street. But everyone does it anyway. I do it when I'm there. As soon as I moved to Germany, it was like the second time that I did it, my friend was like, Bruno, what did you do? You're crazy? Like, there's a police car over there. Like, you want to get us in trouble? I was like, oh, what? So, yeah, if you're monitored, you're being monitored, you're not breaking the law, especially if you know that the consequence will happen. I mean, the accountability is there because most of the times, well, I can talk about Brazil again. The laws they exist. They are there. Like people know what they're supposed not to do, but they just don't care because there's no accountability. Like there's no repercussion. So whatever, like who cares?
Yeah. But imagine, like that's the thing. Is like in a street where you have that you've just said. Like I think it's the same in France. Like I mean, I'm from France, and people don't like French love to not follow the rules. I think it's and I guess it's a Latin thing. Maybe it's but Brazil has like a similar traits. But in those environments, like when you're jaywalking, you have accountability because tons of other people are there. And if there was like if someone wanted to actually enforce these things, you could put cameras. Like it's not a difficult problem to solve. But if you're talking about the sea where it's like 70% of the planet is covered by waters, whilst I think cities are maybe less than 2%. And those 2% have tons of people. So it's very easy to monitor what's happening in those areas. But for that 70% massive area where nobody is there, and because of that, the number of instances of bad behavior per unit surface is going to be very low. Like, because if you have not many people and it's a massive area, it's much harder to monitor. So yeah, it's kind of like a great example of the jaywalking because that's like in the city center, lots of people, easy to monitor, and still you have those behaviors. I mean, jaywalking is not a big of an issue, but like if you're talking out at sea, it's so much harder. Like you can't put sensors on a post somewhere. Like the only way you do that is by having a boat going super far or a plane. And I guess that's why sometimes you have a plane that crashes and we don't know where it crashed because it's so hard to know what's happening. That's why it's an interesting problem to solve with robotics, because robotics are you go into the environments that are like dirty and dangerous. It's like the typical thing you said about robotics, and that's where the use cases are the best. It's like where it's not great to send a human, send robots instead, whether it's drones or like robotic boats or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you eat fish, Matt?
I do, yes.
I'm just asking because in this documentary, I just remembered like the guy, I think, so I have his name here, Ali Tabrizi, so the British filmmaker. I think one of his recommendations is very extreme. Like if you want to save the ocean, just stop eating fish. Like it's very, very extreme.
I think that's one of the things that was poorly received about the documentary is that it felt like you had lots of good points, and then ultimately it felt like it was actually an argument about I can't remember if it's vegetarian or vegan, but I don't think that's actually true. And fish is like way more sustainable than eating red meat. Which, I mean, from Brazil, I'm here in Uruguay, it's like so much red meat. Eating fish is a much better thing to do. So, it's not about stopping fishing. It's about, ultimately, if we had the data, it's a relatively simple problem. It's like, if you had the perfect data of how many fishes are in your water, and you could know that at any one time, being able to just say, okay, we can only fish, I don't know what the number is, but like 5% a year or whatever, and then you can in real time see if the stock is staying the same or going down. There's nothing wrong with it's the same as like managing a crop ultimately. Like, you need to farm in a way that is sustainable, otherwise you might deplete the soil from like the nutrients to grow things. I don't think there's any difference with like fishing. It's just the problem now is we don't have the data to know whether what we're doing is sustainable, and because people are overfishing in some areas of the world, like around China, then those vessels go into other areas of the world, like coast of Uruguay, coast of like East Africa or West Africa, and you get those international vessels that just go fishing into other people's fish stock where they haven't used it, and then that's like very unfair as a country, and also it's terrible for the environment.
So what would be the ideal scenario? So to have those drones around all the world, around all the oceans of the world?
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's, but not necessarily just flying drones. Like, because by the way, the term drone is kind of confusing because you could also use it to talk about a robotic vessel, like a boat. So it's just you need lots of robotic assets that will carry sensors at a very, very low cost and just give you an accurate, like almost like a digital twin of the planet, if you will, where everyone could see like exactly what's happening in real time everywhere, and then proper rules about like how do you manage that. But I think it's completely inevitable that it will happen. And there's no fundamental physics rules that we need to break to make that happen. It's just like, the resources to develop all of this. And so, for example, we have some projects with our drones. I talked about, having robotic hangars that you install, and it's like an infrastructure on the ground where the drones fly by themselves to and from. There's nothing stopping you putting that on a boat. And then you have those robotic boats that maybe travel 1,000 kilometers away from the shore. And from there, you have those small, nimble, high-speed drones that give you an area, like monitoring much further out from the shore. And then, pretty soon, anyway, with Starlink, you'll have like very high bandwidth internet everywhere. So that boat can be 1,000 kilometers away from the shore. You still have real-time data on what's happening there. So I think that the long term is you will have these vessels everywhere with small planes, robotic flying from them, collecting data all at the same time, having computer vision, automatically detecting things, and you will have like in real time, you'll be able to see exactly how many boats there are, where, doing what, how are they fishing. And also these drones, it's not just about the boat. They will be able to tell you where are the marine mammals. Maybe they will take samples of water and they will be able to tell you there are things called eDNA. So it's like you can, by looking at the content in the water, you can tell what is the species in that water. That's basically the DNA they leave behind them. So you will be able to tell basically in real time how are the ecosystem doing it globally. And again, I think it's going to take a while, but that's inevitable that you will have this at some point.
Wow, eDNA. It's the first time I hear about this. So eDNA, environmental DNA, is nuclear or mitochondrial DNA that's released from an organism into the environment. So basically, dead fish cells and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Feces, mucus, okay, gametes. So those vessels, the ones that go underwater, are they capable of collecting eDNA nowadays?
Yeah. I'm not an expert specifically on that field. So from my understanding right now, the way you do an eDNA collection is it's typically like, a science survey type of analysis. So you you have a team of scientists that go on a boat. That boat goes far out to sea. Then you lower a water collection mechanism. Then you get that water in, and then you bring it back to a lab, and then you analyze it in the lab. I don't know what's the state of development of that technology and how soon it's going to be able to collect the data and analyze it in real time when it gets collected, or analyze it on the boats. So right now you need to get it back to a lab. So you need to collect it and then bring it somewhere.
Got it. But the drones that you're developing at Marble right now, they're just flying, right?
We can hover. The drone takes off and land vertically, so it can hover. And we have design concepts to be able to, you take off vertically hovering, you accelerate flying forward, and then maybe 20 kilometer, 30 kilometer away from the shore, you do another hover where you lower on a cable, like with a reel, you lower a container into the water, you take a water sample as you hover, reel it back in, and then you transition again, fly back, and then you can deposit that sample back on shore. We don't do that yet, but that is, I think that that's going to be something of very high value. Because today, if you want to get a sample far outshore, you need to go with a boat. So you need to have staff on board, and it's just really expensive and polluting.
Do you remember in Interstellar? Have you seen this movie? At the beginning of the movie, they just have this drone flying around and whatever. And I think in the lore, in the story, he used to belong to the military or surveillance company, and it was basically like your description of the future. We're gonna have those drones just taking care of the crops and taking care of the ocean, and so that's how you see the future. Like, we're gonna have those drones everywhere, above the water, underwater, just surveilling everything.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
The one in Interstellar was based on an actual military drone.
Oh.
Which is like a very so it would have been a Predator probably. I think it's MQ-7 or MQ-9. Who is, I think, General Atomics. So it's like a very typical military drone, but that can carry rockets and things, so it's not like just surveillance. And these are very, very large aircraft that need a runway to take off from, and the reason they're very large, it's very simple. The physics for planes is, if you want a plane that flies far and stays airborne a long time, you need a big plane. And so they're very large because they're designed to stay aloft for I can't remember exactly, but 12 hours, 24 hours. In the future, you're not going to have very large drones. If you want to deploy millions of drones, you don't want them to take off from airports. You don't want to build airports everywhere. You need smaller drones that take off and land vertically from an infrastructure that you barely see, and also it means something that you don't really notice. Our drones, when they fly at when they're cruising at the altitude collecting the data, you can't see them, you can't hear them. They're not like a visual or auditory pollution. The drone in Interstellar is really big, very noisy. You don't want that flying around. That doesn't sound like a great future. You just want these things happening in the background without you noticing. And you're talking about crops, and that's definitely going to be something as well in the future that happens and will be beneficial. It's a bit difficult to do today, but crop monitoring with drones is going to be a big use case as well.
Why it's difficult to do it today?
Well, there's two reasons. One is, I was saying earlier, talking about in an industry, as it matures, you end up with people specializing onto different layer of the stack of the industry. So, for planes, I said people that build the seats. Early on, probably the aircraft company was building the seat themselves, and then later on, you have someone that specializes and just build the seats. That means when you're early in an industry, when you're building the industry from scratch, you want to pick up segments of your industry where there are as little layers as possible of that stack, because that means you minimize the number of people you need or the number of things you need to build yourself. And for example, marine monitoring, when you collect the data, the post-processing is relatively easy because, computer vision to detect a boat is one of the easiest kind of application of computer vision. It's quite mundane to do, actually. So it's not if you imagine those layers to solve that problem, you need to collect the data, but then once you've collected it, you're basically done. It's very easy to post-process it. If you're talking about agriculture, you collect the data. Let's say it's the same as for us. It's just photos of the ground instead of the sea. Actually, that's not even the case. You need very specific camera. You need multispectral cameras for agriculture, but let's say it's probably the same. Once you've done that in agriculture, you need to analyze that data to make recommendation on the type of nutrient you should be putting in or the pest control you should be doing. That's already a lot more complex than just detecting a boat or not. And then once you've done that, you need to wait until the farmer implements your recommendation. And then you need to wait for weather to also play its role. And then you need to wait maybe 12 months to actually have the crop output. And then at that point, you don't even know whether your recommendation is the main reason the crop was better or worse, because there are so many other variables that need to happen into it. So it's like getting back to that layer of the stack is like so many layers that it's very valuable to do ultimately, like extremely valuable, but if the industry is immature, you shouldn't start there. You should start on lower layer of stack. And the second reason it's also not great to do agriculture today is that I mentioned earlier, for regulatory purposes, you need a pilot to monitor the drone today. And that pilot typically needs to see the drone. Mm-hmm. And that means the drone is max 500 meters away from you. And that's you can imagine, like, it's kind of pointless to have something robotic if you need a pilot that follows the drone within 500 meters. It's kind of like you're defeating the point of it being robotic and that doesn't need supervision. So that's why most people that operate drone today, they're trying to fly further than that. And for us, for example, we want to fly what's called beyond line of sight. That means further than 500 meters. You can do that today, but you need exemptions. In the future, you won't need exemption. There will be, the regulators will have a system in place, but today you don't have that. Today you need exemptions. Those exemptions are much easier to get above water because you can say nobody really flies low level above water. You don't have small general aviation plane. You don't have gliders. And also on the ground, you don't have anything. So, if you have an immature technology where you're bound to fail, it's okay. If you're talking above crops, there's going to be people flying. There's going to be people on the ground. You're going to have to cross roads if you go between fields. So all of these things mean that it's actually much harder. So it's kind of like those two reasons, the complexity of the stack and the regulatory aspect. That means it's purely from like a feasibility, it's not the great place to start. In terms of value, again, incredibly valuable. So it will happen, but it's just in an immature industry, you don't want to do this. I mean, there are people doing it, but it's going to be niche and it's going to take a while to like mature and like properly scale. I think marine monitoring is a much better industry to start with.
Mm-hmm. But how, like, even in the sea, over the sea, like, there's still seagulls, there's still like some birds. How do you make sure that you don't just crash into them?
That's a good question. So, I mean, well, I guess there's like, in general, it's a good question. I mean, traditionally, you're going to have birds that are going to be close from shore, maybe close to like fishing vessels. But when we're flying out, we're typically at like 1,000 feet. So that's like maybe 300 meters. And there aren't birds at those altitudes far out to see. And in general, when they hear the drone, they tend to like move away. We haven't seen that, but I've definitely heard of large birds attacking drones. But that's but that's going to be during takeoff and landing. And at that point, it's kind of like, it's it's a general problem, but we've never had that.
Oh, there was a police somewhere, I don't remember where, they were training eagles to catch the drones, right?
Yeah, I think I've seen that as well. I don't know. Yeah, that sounds kind of dangerous because they are pretty, like, quickly spinning propellers on drones. So you wouldn't want to like injure an animal or train an animal to go after a drone because that does feel dangerous. But yeah, I mean, when you talk about like how do we manage birds, that's one of the most dangerous things for airliners. Actually, how do you manage birds around airports? There's like a name for like hitting a bird. It's called bird strike. And when you design an aircraft, you have to account for that. It's like a design case. You can't can't design your operation so you don't crash into a bird. You just design the operation so that it's safe even if you crash into a bird.
Got it.
So yeah, I guess. Yeah, and we've never had an instance. It would probably not be a great encounter for the bird, probably not for our drone either. But in terms of danger to the ground, or I guess it would still be pretty minimal.
Got it.
The big risk is other planes. You don't want to crash into other planes.
Ooh. Wow. Okay, but those are way bigger, right? I guess you guys are able to see it.
Oh, but that's we fly our drone much further than we can see them. So we don't see our drone at that point. The way we avoid crashing into other airspace users is you fly in areas where you know for sure nobody else is flying. So that's like a military area, or an area where planes are only allowed to fly if they have a transponder that lets you know where they are, and then the drones can avoid them. Okay. But that's still pretty immature, the development of that of those regulations, and because that's not just a technology for these things to happen, like drones and planes cohabitating on a day-to-day basis. You need harmonized global regulation on what you need, a software that will be able to manage the traffic, and that doesn't exist, and that's going to take a while to develop because it's regulator driven.
Yeah. Oh man, poor birds. But but it's just part of the. I'm like, planes that hit birds all the time as well, right? As far as I know, they're always killing birds. So it's just the reality of the business.
I mean, it doesn't happen that often.
No.
Airliners. I mean, it does at the scale, but it does because there are so many flights happening every day.
Yeah.
But it is a very notable event when it happens on a plane, because you're gonna. I mean, you're gonna pretty. Yeah. It is notable, but planes are designed to handle it, so it's like not. It's not unsafe. It's just you will have to come back and land, and you'll have pretty heavy maintenance. There's lots of procedures around the airport to make sure you don't have birds. But yeah.
Matt, are you familiar with the work from Graham Hancock?
The ring rings a bell. What work?
Let me look for it. One second. Graham Hancock. Yeah, there we go. So, one second. Share screen. There we go. So Graham Hancock is a British writer who promotes science, I guess, theories involving ancient civilizations and hypothetical lost lands. So Hancock speculates that an advanced Ice Age civilization was destroyed in a cataclysm, but that its survivors passed on their knowledge to hunter-gatherers, giving rise to the earliest known civilizations of ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Mesoamerica. So this guy has also a series on Netflix. It's called Ancient Apocalypse, and in this show he goes into a place called Bimini Road. Let's look for it. Bimini Road. Are you have you heard about it?
No, sounds interesting.
So basically, it's a rock formation. Let's look for the accurate description, because I don't know by heart. So the Bimini Road, sometimes called the Bimini Wall, is underwater rock formation near the North Bimini Islands in the Bahamas. The road consists of 0.8 kilometers long, northwest, south. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the thing is, this formation, he claims, it was man-made. And he went there. He was diving there, and like the stones form a road, and some people say it's Atlantis, something like that. But the thing is, they don't have a way to actually study further. I don't think they have the funds. And I was wondering, with this drone technology, I don't know, does it has LiDAR? Maybe that's something that could just scan the bottom of the ocean and look for those ancient civilizations, right?
So you can mount LiDAR on drones, and it does, especially I guess in the Bahamas, where you're gonna have pretty clear water. You could, well, it depends how deep that Bimini Road. So I hadn't heard of this before. It's interesting. Depends how deep it is, but yeah, you could depending if it's not too deep, you could probably scan it using LiDAR with drones. But if you said it's just 0.8 kilometer, so it's not, and it's probably not that wide. So I assume they probably would have scanned it pretty well. Like, if it's a very small site, you might as well just do it by hand almost. Like the drone might help you, but it's the drone value really comes into itself when you need to cover a very large area. But yeah, maybe they've used like at that point you probably want underwater unmanned vessels, like autonomous submarine kind of thing to collect that data. Yeah, but yeah, no, it's interesting. I hadn't heard of either the scientist or that road.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and as far as I know, there's a lot of like ancient cities and stuff they find underwater all the time, because over the years, like the sea level has changed. Areas of the world who used to be above the water are now underwater. So the planet is always changing. For example, I think the Sahara Desert was long time ago like a rainforest. So there's a lot of stuff. Graham Hancock claims that there's a lot of ancient lost civilizations, and that we just lost track of, and many of them are underwater. So I just remember this, like, damn, that would be amazing to have a LiDAR technology. For example, I think in from Brazil, the Amazons, apparently, from what I understand, there's a lot of people used to live in the Amazons before. They had like vast cities, but nowadays all covered by rainforest. But if someone could just scan the whole thing with LiDAR, they scanned some pieces already, and they found there's a pyramid there, there's a city there, but they apparently just scan a small portion. But imagine if you could scan the whole thing. I'm sure they would discover so much interesting stuff.
Yeah, well, I think that's where we, most people would have used Google Earth, and I think Google Earth or like Google Maps gives us a misconception on how well we know the planets, because you go on Google Maps, you look at the city next to you, and it's like, wow, it's great resolution. You can see most things, right? And because of that, I think most people infer that this is satellite, and Google Earth or like Google Maps, it's not satellites, it's actually planes that they pay regularly to fly around and take photos, because satellite is not good enough resolution. And satellite also, when you do collect data, satellites only come by very occasionally. So maybe a satellite will come maybe once a day on the same site. So it's not like a satellite's gonna satellites don't give you an accurate picture of the Earth yet. And so I'm not surprised if there are tons of things that we don't know about yet, whether it's on land or underwater. It's even worse, because we don't have good ways of collecting data at a large scale at good resolution. And again, most people don't realize that, because you get tricked by Google Maps thinking, oh, wow, we have surely we can see my street in super high resolution, so we can see the whole world every day in that resolution. But no, it's like Google does that maybe every 6 months in the cities where it's very important, but otherwise it's like very occasionally they fly planes and take photos.
Yeah. So Matt, you mentioned already that in the future of Marble, you guys are planning to have this little device that goes down and collects the water sample from the eDNA from the water. So that's something that is in the plans for the future. Are there any other future plans at Marbles that you could share with us? New technologies?
I mean, the fundamental, getting back to, again, it being a relatively new industry, the first things that needs to be built is the foundation. And foundation often are like the boring bits. So it's a bit like, I don't know, like, very, you wouldn't want to build YouTube when you had 56 kilobits per second internet. What you needed to build at that point were like, whatever underlying technology you need to build to have higher speed internet. And for drones right now, the thing that is really difficult is that flying drones are unreliable. Like even military drones, they crash every 500 hours. so they're expensive. You can't really fly them regularly. So the key thing we're trying to solve is how do you lower the cost of a square kilometer of data collected, which is by making the technology more reliable, having better software to manage that data, better sensors, and that's kind of like in some way the boring foundation. All the cool application on top that are going to be more exotic, like lowering a water container to collect the DNA, or there are things in the defense space as well that you could do, like lowering a sonar. You could also do like magnetic anomaly detection. So you basically carry something that measures magnetic field and you can tell what's underwater based on that. Like all of these things will happen eventually, but it's kind of like when we talk about these, it's a bit like you're talking about building YouTube when you're still at 56 kilobits per second internet. So you could start doing it, but it just wouldn't make much sense because you can't really implement it until you figured out the foundations.
No, but there's a plan, basically. Yeah. So that's good to hear. Do you have any advice for aspiring entrepreneurs entering the airspace industry?
I would say, fundamentally, when you want to start a company, you just really need to care about what you're building because it's going to take a while, it's going to be tough, and people shouldn't start businesses on the back of like it sounds cool or like, it should be you're really passionate about something you want to exist and you just go after that and you're going to do that for 10 years, even though for the first like 8 years, it's going to be like nothing happens and it's really tough. Especially if you're in something in hardware, because like we are, because it's much harder to make things happen than just building a website. But so caveat to that, I would actually say I would encourage people going into hardware or like deep tech, actually building physical things, and specifically in aerospace, because we've discussed. Whether you're talking those AirTaxis or the drones, the aerospace industry is going to be massively different in 20 or 30 years. Mm-hmm. And that means there is a massive opportunity to make those things happen. And that also means that even if you try and, eventually you fuck it up, because if you start a company, that's the most likely outcome is it doesn't work. It's still going to be extremely valuable because you will be learning about that industry that, again, is going to get transformed in the next 20 or 30 years. So I think it's a great industry to go work into because, so much is going to happen. And if you get involved now, you're gonna be it just gives you a massive advantage over everyone else who's gonna jump on the bandwagon in 5 years when it becomes more common. A bit like with the AI craze at the minute when tons of people realize, oh, there's ChatGPT, and now they're all building startup in the field. I'm guessing the one that will have the most impact is the one that already knew about the tech before that, not just jumping on the bandwagon last minute. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I think it's a great industry to be involved in, and if people are passionate about it, they should go building companies in that space.
Great. One last question, since you mentioned AI, have you considered looking into implementing AI into the drones, some type of AI? Because it's such a hot topic, it seems to be the future, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. But the fundamental is AI is like the areas right now where it's very effective is the areas where you have tons of data to train the models. And usually the larger the data set, the better model you get ultimately. Mm-hmm. And in our space, I've said the issue right now is we're still very mature. And so it's expensive to get data and you don't really get large volumes of it. So the first problem to solve is how do you get that large volume of data before you can start building the AI on top. There are quite a few companies building AI tools in the drone space, but it's kind of like you don't have data. So what are you you can't really train on anything. There are caveats to that. So today we're actually building some AI tools to do monitoring of the health of the plane. So you can imagine we have like thousands of sensors on the aircraft. And it's very hard from those sensors to know what's going wrong. You can't just build code that will say, for each of these parameters, flag it if it goes above X or Y, especially when some of them are telling you about vibration or whatever. You can say, tell me when temperature goes higher than a number, for example, because it might burn, but it's not that smart. So there is a lot of AI you can put into that aspect so that the model can tell you, I suspect something's going to go wrong in the next 30 minutes. So you should probably call it a day because, I've looked from all the flights you've done before, the model can tell implicitly when you're likely to have a failure. So there is definitely a lot of stuff happening in that area. And then the obvious one is actually on the processing of the data. So I said it's not there yet because you need more data, but once you have that data, there's so much you're going to be able to do. So yeah, for us, it's detecting vessels, detecting marine mammals automatically in a way that is way more effective than a human.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah.
Man, that's so interesting. Matt, do you have any final remarks? Anything else that you'd like to talk about?
There's really no. I mean, it's just been super interesting conversation. Yeah, there are lots of interesting topics. I need to look more into the things that you talked about that I wasn't aware of. Yeah, no, nothing specifically.
All right, Matt. So it was a pleasure, an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for being a part of BruCast. It was extremely interesting, and thank you for doing what you're doing. Like I'm sure I hope we're gonna have fish in 30 years from now. With surveillance, like this type of surveillance, I'm sure we're gonna have it. So thank you very much for doing what you're doing.
Thanks a lot, Bruno. Yeah, really good podcast. Really nice to get on it. Yeah, can't wait to follow all the future ones you do.
All right, thank you very much, Matt. Thank you very much, everyone. If it's your first time watching the channel, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please rank the show 5 stars to ensure that the podcast will be recommended to even more people and allow me keep doing what I'm doing, what I love doing. So BruCast is also on Instagram, X, TikTok, where we upload shorts with the highlights of the show. So follow BruCast on Instagram, X, and TikTok. Links below, all the links below. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Matt. See you next time, everyone. Bye-bye.